I've been debating with myself whether or not to talk about this January 6th commission, which began holding its first hearings today. On the one hand, I consider it to be dumb partisan DC politics, typical congressional theater, kind of like the Benghazi Commission, although I guess this commission is supposed to be nominally not a bipartisan, not nonpartisan. There's a difference. Of course, in effect, this is just as partisan as the Benghazi Commission, and I have to say, I know what it's like to be duped into thinking that these kinds of commissions matter, because back when the whole Benghazi thing went down, I remember I was listening to the radio live when I heard the news at noon. On that day when the whole Benghazi consulate was overrun, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a big story going forward. Politically, this is going to be a big deal, and so I was excited just from I enjoyed political theater a little more back then, just before I'd gotten totally tired of it, and I thought, gee, this Benghazi Commission thing, this will be entertaining. They'll get some, and nothing ever came out of it, of course. It was just, you had a bunch of grandstanding that went on for a bit, and then it was over, and nobody ever cared about it again, because it didn't matter. It wasn't a serious thing. It was a way to score short-term political points, and now Obama's not president. Nobody cares about, whatever happened in Benghazi. Nobody asks questions about what the real issue was then, running guns through Turkey to get to the moderate rebels in Syria, which was the real thing that silly me back then. I was naive enough to believe, hey, maybe if there's this commission investigating the Benghazi situation, they'll get to that, and they'll talk about exposing gun running to Syria. But none of that ever happened, for obvious reasons. Now, Republicans would have been not opposed to gun running to Syria. They wouldn't want to expose the deep state in that kind of way. I mean, that committee was headed by Trey Gowdy, the guy who, has a tears of joy come streaming down his face every time he sees another Confederate statue falling, despite the fact that he's, supposedly a proud Southerner. And so I imagine at the end of the day, we will have a similar situation with this whole January 6th commission. I think that the Democrat partisans, voters who are watching these proceedings with any hope for some kind of, I don't know, moment where they indict Donald Trump for conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government or whatever, I think you're going to be disappointed. The point of this January 6th commission, if you're listening and you're a partisan Democrat who's excited about this, which I doubt you would find this channel if that's the case, but hey, if one of you happen to have found me through some random quirk of the internet, fallen through the cracks, this commission is just meant to rile you up for the midterms. It serves no other purpose. Well, that, and it will set the groundwork for what I keep talking about, the persecution of domestic political dissidents, which is going to extend to be both left and right. Just like how the social media censorship thing, it goes both left and right. They hate anti-war voices as much as they hate Trump supporters, because they consider both to be enemies of the state. And that's why I focus on the term dissident when I'm talking about these kinds of matters, rather than just right-wingers. There are times when I talk about things that only apply to the persecution of right-wingers. But when it comes to this sort of stuff, it's going to be targeted at everybody who has a mind of their own and is not just mindlessly doing it whatever CNN and Anthony Fauci and whatever the favored establishmentarian bureaucrat of the day happens to be. Now, from what I'm seeing about the proceedings today, I think that this January 6th commission might actually have an unintended positive consequence. And that will stem from the testimony of these police officers who, are crying. Well, not, I don't know if they're crying, I won't say that, but they're supposed to be very sympathetic fellows who are just doing their job, just trying to defend their country and defend democracy. And they have these evil white supremacists, these Trump supporters, of course, white supremacist, Trump supporter, synonymous, who came in there with their Trump flags, i.e. their swastika flags, their, I don't know, is there a name for the flag of the Third Reich, other than just the flag of the Third Reich? Well, I don't know. That's what they consider to be the Trump flag, just like how they, very quickly started conflating the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag, even though historically there's no correlation there. The Trump flag is the new Confederate Nazi flag, and that's something that even the judge who sentenced that guy from the Tampa area to 8 months in prison, the first guy to be sentenced for the January 6th thing, he kept centering in on, oh my gosh, you were carrying a Trump flag. Oh. And so they're bringing in all of these cops who were scared and thought they were going to die, and who just, they wanted to defend democracy, and they were willing to give their lives for that. And the Dems, of course, your ordinary libs find these cops to be very sympathetic. They sympathize with these cops, and they are saying, "Gee, you Blue Lives Matter hypocrites! Why don't you like these cops?" And to a certain extent, they're correct in that critique, because supposedly the folks on the right in this country are the Blue Lives Matter crowd, and they're supposed to always love cops. Even when cops do really bad things, they're supposed to favor the cops. But now that these cops are coming out against them so openly, I think that this actually might start to wake a lot of folks up, and a lot of folks already have been over the last year. There's been a huge shift away from the Blue Lives Matter, I won't say movement, but the Blue Lives Matter sentiment has been dying off. It's still incredibly strong, but it's not as strong as it was 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And I think that there's going to be a certain subset of the Blue Lives Matter crowd who, upon seeing the testimony of these officers and the way that they're being weaponized by Pelosi and the Democratic Party, who, they regard, because you have to remember, these guys, the Blue Lives Matter crowd are some of the most partisan boomer Republican types. And so now they have this conundrum where you have these cops and you have Democrats on the same side against all Trump supporters. And that's something that's going to mess with their psyche. And for a lot of them, I think it will push them to the point to where they start to, at the very least, question the cops, if not outright approach them with skepticism from this point on. You have to remember that since the beginning of the Trump era in 2015, the popular right, and I don't mean populist right, I mean popular as in the common rightist in this country, your average Republican voter, has shown an incredible ability to adapt to the changing landscape and to re-examine their beliefs, which, I think fairly should be taken as an indication of the weakness of their convictions, going back, because it has been pretty easy for them to shift on a lot of issues. But in some ways, that is a virtue, because Republicans have been able to go from being ultra hawkish to, almost on net anti-war, at least as far as the voters are concerned. Being anti-war is no longer an insult on the right in America. I think that's an incredibly positive step. And the issue of policing, whether or not you're skeptical at the very least of police, that is becoming far less controversial than it once was, even, in the middle of Trump's tenure as president. And so I think that the right is still in that very malleable state. I don't think that conservative beliefs, if you want to put it that way, have hardened again yet. I think that they're still evolving, and there is a potential for these hearings to push more folks out of the Blue Lives Matter camp. And I don't say this as someone who's like these BLM folks, who wants death to all cops or something like that. I have my problems with cops. I think that they are, they're a part of the problem. There's things that need to be addressed there. But at the same time, I don't, every time I see a cop, I don't want to spit at them or something like that. I think it would be just impractical to live my life that way. I have neighbors who are cops, and so I have to be somewhat adaptive myself. I have to be somewhat nuanced in my approach, and I think that's the correct thing to do. But the worst position by far are certainly the binary always trust and always love the police crowd. That position just simply is not tenable. No matter what other beliefs you have, if you have any beliefs really outside of back the blue is going to come into conflict with those beliefs at some point. Because unless you have total control over the policing apparatus, at some point the cops are going to do something that's really, really bad from your perspective. And so in order to be logically consistent or politically principled, you have to have the ability to criticize and question the actions of the police. And considering that the whole Blue Lives Matter movement was purely a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that over the past year we see the cops have become so instrumental now, now that the BLM folks are gaining some institutional power, the cops are the cops are carrying out their bidding to a certain extent. Obviously, any real hardcore BLM, anti-cop person would go, no, of course, the cops aren't working for us. They're terrible. They're horrible. But from a right-winger's perspective, when they see BLM and Antifa folks get off and not, be thrown in prison for the maximum sentence, and then they see all of these Republicans who merely marched around inside of the U.S. Capitol with flags get 8 months in prison. From their perspective, the cops are clearly, the effect of the cops is benefiting one side relative to the other. The whole Blue Lives Matter idea is predicated on cops hurting or doing damage to bad guys to benefit good guys. But then when they see cops arresting and persecuting people who they perceive to be good guys on behalf of people they perceive to be bad guys, it turns the paradigm on its head. At the end of the day, I think that everyone should finally recognize the police for what they are, which is mercenaries. That's all they are. They are hired guns. And so whether or not they're doing good things or bad things all depends on who is giving them their orders. Now, if a bad person is giving them, wrong and bad and immoral orders, it does reflect poorly on the officers if they carry out those orders. And so I'm not trying to give cops a pass by any means. If cops do things that are bad, even if they're ordered to do it, it's still just as bad. But what matters the most is, of course, controlling those institutions. And so if you're able to gain control of those institutions, you can make the cops into good guys, because they'll be working for you. So from your perspective, they're going to be the good guys. But if you let your enemy control those institutions and you let your enemy make the rules, and that has to do with both statute and with the way in which the law is enforced, although enforcement is the most important thing to control, because if you control enforcement, you can nullify bad statutes. Anywhere in America today, they could decriminalize all drugs if they just elect a sheriff who vows to do that. Now, they might get removed by their governor or whatever, but if those people then elect another sheriff who still refuses to enforce drug laws or gun laws, or preferably both, there's only so much the state can do about it. I guess the state could send in state police, but you could have a county assert its own right of self-determination with a decent amount of success, I think. And so that's why I'm hesitant to just blanket burn all bridges with police. Because no matter how many times we say abolish the police, the institution of policing is not going to disappear overnight. I would like it to change, yes. I would like policing as we know it to go away. And it's something that hasn't existed forever. It's certainly the truth. It's a modern phenomenon. We can do without it, but we're not going to do without it overnight. And I think that the corporate left, folks like George Soros, understand this. That's why you see, I guess, well, corporate left is as good of a term as any, you see them trying to co-opt local police and local prosecutors in order to get their people off and to throw the book at their political enemies. Look at St. Louis. How many of the people who trespassed and broke into the McCloskeys' neighborhood got prosecuted? And then versus you look at how the McCloskeys were treated, they did get prosecuted. That's the utility in controlling the district attorney's office. And so these races like sheriff and state attorney or county prosecutor, district attorney, whatever these offices are called if they're elected, these are, you know, these are really the most important elected positions in America. They're far more important than who your congressman is. You need good people who agree with you in these positions to make sure that the rules are not being enforced in a way to do the most harm possible to you and your community. And you know what? I got off on a big tangent today, but I think it's all been productive. I think that thinking through these things, there are so many different vectors by which people can attack the system and try to get the state off of their backs. And I think the more that folks are alienated by the system, the more hopeless people feel in the short term, the more hope that will bring us in the long term, because people will be forced to pursue alternative avenues. Now, the only downside to what I was just talking about is that, obviously, to become a prosecutor, you can't just have anybody run to be a prosecutor. Pretty sure you got to be a lawyer. And the same sort of issue with running for sheriff, you kind of have to find a cop, and finding a cop who's decent politically and wants to go against the grain is a hard enough challenge to begin with. So, it is going to be an uphill battle. But I mean, there's so many counties in this country, and so many of these local positions. If you just start trying to pick them off, and you find decent people, and you run them everywhere you can, you run a decent candidate, a few of them are going to get through. And then lo and behold, in those jurisdictions, people are going to end up being a lot freer. There was, I can't remember where, I remember only one, hearing about one sheriff's candidate this last election cycle in America who was running on saying, hey, I won't enforce, a whole litany of laws that I think are unconstitutional. There's drug laws, gun laws, all these sorts of things. He was promising people absolute freedom in their county. And I doubt he won because he was just one guy. But if there was a nationwide movement of this would be an excellent thing to try and organize. I wish I knew some way to go about it. But I mean, those are the two offices I would target. Don't worry about state representatives so much. I mean, you have some folks who do that. I mean, well, yeah, there are people who put a lot of money into all of these different, races. But if you could just have an organization that focuses on county sheriffs and local prosecutors, I think it could do a lot of good in this country. So with that said, I guess I will leave things off there for today.